can't believe I am sitting here with you, jazz performer, jazz author, jazz composer, arranger, educator, jazz legend, Dan Haerle. Dan, welcome to Jazz Piano Skills, man. I am thrilled that you are here.
I'm thrilled to be here too, man, because I've known you for a long time as a student at a couple different levels, as a teacher at a couple different levels.
Right.
And it's exciting to see the good you're doing here.
Oh, thank you, man. Yeah, I was thinking about that the other day. 1984. It was 1984 when I came to North Texas. Now, I knew about you long before, I knew you long before you knew me. Because you are the reason I came to North Texas, to come to study jazz.
Don't blame me. No.
Well, I'm not blaming you, but you are absolutely the reason. So I was kind of reminiscing this week with knowing that you were coming on to be on Jazz Piano Skills. I was kind of reminiscing back to 1984 and you know, thinking about how much has changed since then in music and with technology. I mean, the fact that we're doing this right now.
Yeah, the fact that things can be streamed and so forth. It opens up a lot of possibilities. I still don't like it.
Right. Right. Kind of old school, right?
Yeah. I mean, I'm really old school in that respect. I like to be there to interact with the listeners or the other players.
Right.
Or, you know.
Right. Yeah, you're old school in that sense, but you know, you were always on the cutting edge, man. Back in 1984, 85, 86, when the first Apple Macintosh came out, right? And you started the MIDI lab at the University of North Texas there.
Yeah.
I mean, that was like cutting edge stuff, right? We were all kind of trying to figure out what the heck is this MIDI stuff and how does all this how does all this work, you know? That was pretty exciting times. I remember a story. I told you this is 85, you know, and I told you I said to you one day, I said, hey man, I made the plunge. I bought a Macintosh, and you said, oh wow, which one did you get? Because there was the Mac Plus, there was the Mac SE, and then I think there was one other one I can't remember. But I said, oh, I got the Mac SE, and you said the one with the 20 megabyte of memory. And I said, yes. And you said, whoa, man, you'll never outgrow that thing.
Yeah, right.
Right? Look how different that is today, you know? So it's been amazing. Well, listen, so honored and blessed to have you on Jazz Piano Skills and introduce you to the listeners from around the world. So I thought the best thing to do, and I would love to hear this too, because quite honestly, I know a little bit about just a little bit about your background, your childhood and upbringing. So I thought we'd start off by just letting you kind of introduce yourself to the listeners and share with us a little bit of your childhood, how you got into music, how you got into jazz, and how you got into education and so forth.
Well, I was born in Quincy, Illinois, and went to elementary school and most of high school there. But when I was young, I was fascinated with the piano. My father was a musician. He was a trombone player and arranger for bands that he played with. Oh, wow. So we had a piano at home.
Right.
And he didn't play piano, but he used it in his writing. And I loved to mess with it. And they both had so many recordings, both classical music, jazz, all kinds of stuff. So I grew up with a great opportunity to hear a lot of music. And I'd sit at the piano and try to learn the melodies that I liked someone singing or playing, you know. Trial and error, that's all it was, you know.
Yeah.
And gradually I'd hear a few more bits and pieces, you know. So it was good practice for my ear. No one at that time told me, you know, music is sound and you need to learn how to hear different sounds, you know.
Right.
But my father exploited me basically and used me like an Aebersold play-along record. This is way before Jamey put out his first play-along record in 1968, I think, or 67.
That's amazing.
And but I always say there's bad news and good news. The bad news is we didn't have any fake books, so we had to learn tunes off of recordings by ear. The good news is we didn't have any fake books, and we had to learn tunes off of recordings by ear.
Right.
I didn't realize it at the time, but You know, it was good experience.
Right.
And then finally, my dad taught me how to play what I call boom chink piano, bass note in the chord, boom chink, boom chink, boom chink, boom chink. And then he'd wail away on top of it, you know.
Right.
And he showed me all the chords to play for a song, you know, and I just memorized them.
Wow.
And finally one day I said, Dad, why do I push those notes? He said, well, that's an F6 chord, F-A-C-D, 1, 3, 5, 6. Wow. A big light bulb went on. And then I started figuring out what the other chords I was playing, you know.
Right.
That was the only theory lesson I ever had in my life.
That's amazing, man.
Yeah. And I was embarrassed often that I didn't progress faster or as quick as a lot of people I knew. But I didn't have the opportunity to go to jazz camps or to buy a jazz improv book or, you know.
Heck, that didn't even exist, did it?
No.
Right. I mean, it didn't even
In fact,
exist.
in 1974, I had my first book published, which was just a stack of stuff that I gave out to my students. And the guy was wanting to publish a jazz book. And I said, well, you think he'd be interested in this? He said, this is exactly what he's interested in. So that was a book called Jazz Rock Voicings for the Contemporary Keyboard Player.
Yes.
And,
Still available today.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Still available. I've added a few other ones since.
Oh, yeah, just a few.
But we didn't have play-along records, you know, so I'd just sit and play the melody to a song on a recording. And maybe I'd embellish it a little bit, put in a grace note or, a little extra pickup note, or maybe I'd do something rhythmic with it, you know.
Right.
Well, I was improvising. I didn't think about it. I mean, I didn't know what I was doing. I was just having fun. And to this day, I remember thinking at one point, I figured that out. Maybe I don't need someone to tell me everything, you know.
Correct.
And the way I put it is you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink.
Right.
But what you got to do is make him thirsty.
Very good point. Excellent point.
And as teachers, I think we have an important role to guide a student's development, but you can't really teach someone to play jazz.
Right.
They have to practice. They have to listen.
No doubt about it. Right?
You know.
They got to get immersed.
And so it's been a lot of fun. And in the process of teaching, I learned too, and it got me to thinking that as musicians, I think we should really kind of be part teacher and part student our whole lives, because there's always more to learn.
No doubt. No doubt.
Can never get bored with this, you know.
Yeah, I tell everybody all the time, it's not like a model airplane where you put it together and you're done with it and you set it on the shelf, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
But so I went to my folks when I was, I don't know, 9 or 10 or something like that. I said, could I take piano lessons? Because we had this piano sitting there, and they both knew what life was like for musicians on the road. Crummy hotels, awful food, bad late hours, and, you know, a lot of miles traveling and everything. Said, no, you don't want to study piano. Go play baseball.
Right.
I said, oh, okay. So I played baseball, but I kept trying to figure stuff out on my own, you know. And I think it wasn't until I got in college that I realized I didn't really have good piano instruction. I had a lot of teachers that taught me to play pieces.
Right.
And that was fine, you know, because I learned something in learning those pieces. But no one ever taught me how to practice or how to get better.
Right.
Which reminds me, I was on tour with my quartet several years ago, South Texas, San Marcos or somewhere, I forget where we were. And in the music building, there was a sign on the wall there quoting Vince Lombardi, great coach of the Green Bay Packers. And it said, perfection is not possible, but in the pursuit of perfection, we can gain excellence. And
I love that quote.
Yeah. Oh, I thought that says everything.
That hit home. Yeah.
But I think of teaching in a different way now. I don't teach an agenda. I don't have a strict agenda, and I try to encourage students to do different things in their practice and in their listening and so on. But I always tell them, if you have a question, let me hear from you. You know,
Right.
you don't have to wait till your next lesson.
Correct.
And occasionally I get some good questions. They'll send me a piece of music to look at and explain it to them or something, you know. And the only thing right now these days, it's been a little chaotic because my computer that I had for many years died a couple of months ago.
That's a nightmare.
And so naturally I lost a lot of stuff.
Oh my gosh.
And
Right.
they salvaged, I think, a lot of what was on the hard drive, but then they dumped it on this other drive. And now I can't find anything.
So your Mac Plus finally gave way.
Mac Plus finally gave way.
So you mentioned Cole College. You know, well, first of all, Quincy, Illinois. I grew up in Rock Island, Illinois.
Oh, wow.
Just up the Mississippi
Yeah,
River.
yeah, I know.
Right? I've been down to Quincy, been through Quincy many, many times.
Yeah.
Right? And in fact, my high school used to play Quincy all the time in basketball and
Yeah,
football
yeah.
and so on. And so I'm from the Quad Cities, Moline. You know, Rich Madison was from that area. I went to high school there actually went to high school with my mom, believe it or not.
Really?
Yeah, it's really fun. You know, it's kind of funny. When I got to North Texas, my mom gave me a yearbook picture of Rich, and I went to Jack Peterson. I said, "Hey, you know this guy?" And he goes, "Is that Rich?" And I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "I'll give you $100 for that right now." You know, because he wanted that picture to show Rich. So anyway, when you say Quincy, Illinois, man, that's like taking me back to my childhood because I grew up in that area. But Cole College, talk to me about that because, you know, jazz education just wasn't a prominent thing there at that time. So what was happening at Cole College? Were you a music major there at Cole College?
Yeah, we had really two majors: music education or performance.
Okay.
And no one did performance. Everybody were music ed major because they wanted to get a job being able to teach.
Right.
And,
The safe path.
But you know, I remember thinking, I wish I could study composition, and that just wasn't an option. It was either performance or music ed.
Right.
And so I got my degree in music ed, and I taught high school, well, elementary, junior high, and high school for 2 years. And it was great. I had a good time. I enjoyed it. I think I taught the kids something. But I knew I didn't want to do that the rest of my life.
Right.
So I resigned and went back to grad school. And that was when I also wanted to make a break with the northeast Iowa weather. I was coming home from a job about 2 o'clock in the morning in a blizzard and shoveling under the car.
It was something else, right?
And I remember saying to my bass player friend that was with me that night, "That's it, man. I'm going south. I don't care where, but I'm going south." But I'd heard about North Texas, and I'd heard about the jazz program there. So I thought, that's where I'm going.
Yeah.
And
Great decision.
yeah, it was a great choice. But when I started as a grad student there, I was a music ed major because that's what I'd done before. And the same semester, I took a jazz styles class from Sam Adler, the composer who studied with Paul Hindemith and so on. And I said, "Do you think I could take your styles class?" He said, "Oh, sure, of course you could." I asked him if I could be a composer major, composition major. And I had taken his styles class, so I apparently did okay in that class because he said, "Oh, you're fine. Yeah, we'll do composition." And so that was a great experience. He insists I write at least 8 bars every day, and he'd say, how did he put that? I don't know. When I'd bring him in something to look at, he'd look it over and he'd say, "Now, because of what happened back here 30 measures before, that has to be an F sharp."
Yeah.
And I'm going like,
Whoa.
"Really?" Wow. And after I thought about it for a minute, I realized he's right. So it was a kind of a different level or way of thinking about music that was very stimulating to me.
Right.
Put it mildly.
So what did you ended up with a master's from the University of North Texas?
Yeah, I had a
It was North Texas State University at that time, right?
Yeah, it wasn't University of North Texas yet.
Yeah. Yeah, because when I came in 1984, it was North Texas State University.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was just the last couple of years after that it changed.
It did. I think it was around 1988, 89, 90, somewhere in there that it changed to the University of North Texas.
Well, anyway, because of that degree, I got a job at Kansas State University teaching classical theory
Yeah.
and composition and so
Right.
forth.
Right.
And there was no jazz program there, but they had a jazz band, and I'd occasionally write them a chart, and so
Right.
forth. And but the big decision that came along, due to Leon Breeden, who was my mentor and in charge of the jazz program for many years at North Texas, he recommended me for a job in California that was going to be half classical and half jazz. And I think, do I want to teach jazz? I want to be a composer,
Wow.
I want to have my music played by great string quartets and symphony orchestras and everything.
Wow. See, I didn't know that. I didn't know that.
Yeah,
so
I mean,
composition was your passion.
That was my passion. And I thought, I like jazz and I like to play jazz piano and so on, but do I really want to teach it,
Right.
So I finally said, okay, we'll give it a try, and that's been the story of my career, really. Some opportunity comes along and I'd say, yeah, why not?
Why not?
And the only one I decided not to be considered for was in Sydney, Australia, a theory position there. I was thinking about really moving at one point, and that was part of the reason I didn't want to do it either. But Mike Knock, fine piano player, is from Australia, and I met him one time when I was down there with Jamey, and I met some cool musicians, some good musicians.
Yeah.
But anyway, what was I saying?
About Leon Breeden, the composition.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
So I decided to try the job in California, and I did that, and I was teaching classical piano and classical theory and jazz improv and jazz listening and so on,
Right.
half and half. The Monterey Jazz Festival wanted them to hire somebody, and the person that had preceded me in that job, oh no, it wasn't directly preceded, but Jerry Coker had taught there. And I think, I don't know how that all came about. Jerry Coker had also worked for Bill Lee at Sam Houston State in Texas.
Oh, no kidding.
He was the dean of the music program down there. And so then, I was there 3 years, and Jerry called me up and said, "You want to come to Miami and work with me down here?" I said, "You bet."
Wow. Warm.
Yeah, well, I love the winters there.
Yeah.
Magic. But the summertime,
Hot, right?
yeah, I did a couple of things out of town in July and August, and flew back to Miami in an air-conditioned airplane, walked through the air-conditioned airport, out into the parking lot. It's like someone took one of those little army blankets that was soaked in water and just put it over me. And I thought, wow.
Wow.
But it was great. I really enjoyed working with Jerry. I mean, I just thought, this is one of the guys in jazz education. I got to, learn from him.
Well, when I think of jazz education, I think of you, Jerry Coker, David Baker as the pioneers. Well, I think John Mahegan, and then you, Jerry Coker, and David Baker as the pioneers of jazz education.
Well, I think we all made some contributions. Jerry and I did a lot of interesting things with courses and with groups. We had a couple of big bands, but we had groups that were kind of like 8 or 10 pieces that weren't combos, but they allowed for a different kind of writing and a different kind of playing and so.
Right.
But we really promoted this combo small group concept. Combos directed by students.
Right.
Because first of all, there's not enough teachers to get together and rehearse 10 or 12 or 15 combos every week.
Right.
So you want to lead a band. Okay, there you go.
There you go, right. Yeah.
But there were some good years there. But the dean had a funny philosophy. Jerry and I couldn't get any help from him in ways we needed in terms of supporting
the jazz program?
Things we needed to support the program.
Right.
Charts, just a copier,
Right.
We came back at the end of the summer and the copy machine was gone. And we just kind of said, what?
Yeah, what do you do now? Yeah, right.
So anyway, that was at the end of my second year there. I was thinking, I really need some time to practice. I'm not happy with my security on some scales and some keys, so I need to go back in the shed for a while. So I'll just quit. I worked on Miami Beach, tried to save as much money as I could so I could afford to be broke.
Right.
And have a little cushion to save the day,
Right.
And actually, as it turned out, I worked enough, and my ex-wife worked also, so we didn't really have to go into the savings too much. It worked out pretty good. But interesting place.
So how'd you get from Miami? Was it from Miami that you went directly to North Texas to teach at North Texas?
No.
No, okay.
I went to North Texas 2 different times. One when I went down there for grad school in 63.
Right.
And then 77 when I came back to join the faculty.
Okay, right. But were you at Miami before the teaching position before North Texas was the Miami position?
What happened was the Miami thing faded, and I packed up my bags and went to New York. Okay. And I had lived in New York when I was in high school and younger.
Okay.
But we had some little high school groups, but I didn't get to play with anybody that could really play,
Right.
Or study with anybody that I liked to. So it was a great experience, and I just loved New York anyway. I always say it's a great place to visit, but you shouldn't live there.
You're right. That's great, right? You always hear the
something like that.
Yeah, that's great, man. That's awesome.
But
so at North Texas, I mean, you were there during the years where it really exploded, where it really became the jazz school.
Yeah, there were good years. I was there from 63 to 66 for grad school. Right. And then I came back in 77 and retired in 2002. I was there 25 years.
So when you went back to teach, was Rich Madison already there and Jack Peterson?
Rich Madison, Jack Peterson were.
They were already there?
Wow. Yeah. Jim Riggs was there.
Jim Riggs, right.
A couple other people.
And Breeden was still the director.
Breeden was directing the 1 o'clock.
Right.
Running the program.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But when I got back to North Texas, I went to New York, spent a couple of years freelancing, had some fun. While I was there, I did a couple of tours with Clark Terry, one in the States, one overseas. And
now, how did you connect with Clark Terry? How did that come about?
I think I met him when I was teaching at Kansas State, and they brought him in as a clinician, guest artist, and so they wanted me to put together a local rhythm section to accompany him,
Wow.
And I remember the first tune we played, which was at a session in the afternoon, wasn't an evening concert. I'm sitting there kind of waiting for a space in his playing to drop a little comma in there, and no space. I'm going, what's going on? And I turn around and I look and I see him breathing in his nose and blowing out the horn, rotary breathing, and I think, oh my gosh, wow.
He's phenomenal.
But anyway, that was the first time I got to play with him and get acquainted. And then we did a couple of festivals together, other places.
Right.
And so he called me up for this tour of the States, which was a mini Newport tour. It was like 3 groups on the tour at any time.
Wow.
And we'd all do one concert big concert in whatever city we played in, but while we were there, we'd go out to different schools and do clinics and things like that. So he asked me to do that because of that.
Wow.
And while I was living in Brooklyn, my friend Ed Solf came over one day. We had a little session at the house, and he said, "Hey, you should come out. Clark, we're playing with Clark Saturday night at someplace. You ought to come out and say hello." And I said, "Hey, yeah, that sounds great. I'll do it." So I went out to this hall where they were playing, went backstage, and we were having a real nice talk, just, "How you doing, man?" and everything. And he says, "Well, you want to play?" Because the piano player hadn't arrived. And he'll go unmentioned. I don't want to slam somebody.
Right.
But it's suspected that he had a lady.
Okay. Yeah. Right.
But he hadn't arrived. I said, "Well, what are you going to play?" He said, "Oh, you know the tunes." And I said, I hope so. Because Clark never called tunes. He'd play part of something in front. He wouldn't tell you what key. He'd figure you know the key or you hear the key.
Right.
So he starts out noodling around and thinks C minor. It's the bridge, The Secret Love. Okay. And away we go.
And where you go, right.
And so I got through the gig all right. I knew all the tunes and didn't embarrass myself too much. And about 2 weeks later, he called me to go to Europe.
Wow. Wow.
So I thought, glad I knew the tunes.
Glad you knew the tunes. Did you do a little mumbles with him? Did he do mumbles?
Oh, he hated to do mumbles.
Did he really?
Yeah, but overseas, he'd do it in 3 or 4 languages.
That's hilarious.
Yeah,
That's hilarious.
He'd do a French mumble and an Italian mumble.
Oh, that's hilarious. I never thought about that.
Yeah.
Oh, that's funny, man.
He was a great cat to work for. Great human being, period.
Yes, right.
But wonderful sense of humor.
And what, didn't he live here in Fort Worth or Dallas? Wasn't he from Texas?
No, he's from St. Louis.
St. Louis? Okay.
But I think he had a girlfriend that lived in Dallas or Fort Worth for a while.
Well, yeah, maybe that's what I'm thinking.
I think it might be.
Yeah. So, okay, well, how about Stan Kenton? You perform with Stan Kenton?
Well, I did the summer clinics with the Kenton Band.
Okay.
Because Stan didn't teach; he was just there as a figurehead,
Right.
Stan Kenton Jazz Clinic,
Right.
and the band would play every night,
Right.
and so on. And but he didn't want to teach theory, so he'd hire somebody like me to teach a theory class and so on.
Right.
And we'd do a rhythm section class. I remember one day I had a real epiphany. We were getting ready for a rhythm section class, and I was just sitting there playing something on the piano. And now I'm having trouble remembering the drummer's name. Well, I'll use there were a number of great drummers on the Kenton Band.
No doubt, right.
I think it was John from Indiana.
It will come to you, man.
Anyway, he sat down at the drums and started playing along with me, and I thought, oh boy, that feels good, And we played a little bit and finished the tune, then we had to start the class. John Van Olen.
Okay.
That was the drummer. But it really struck me, we didn't have a bass player. It was just me and John.
Right.
And that felt great. That was a real ephany, man.
Oh, my
I was
gosh,
hardcore.
right?
You got to have a piano, bass, and drums.
Right.
you
Right.
And that was a real important lesson. But usually one night during the camp, we'd have a small group night. Stan would kind of give the band the night off, but I'd always grab some guys out of the band to do a quartet or a quintet or something like that. And Stan was totally cool with these. Yeah, great.
That's awesome.
And so Peter Erskine, I remember Peter and I played a free piece, and very creative cat then. I mean, when he was like 18 or something, And but he came kind of fishing for a response or a compliment or something. And I said, Peter, sounded great, man, but don't play everything I do. because he was just imitating.
Right,
you know.
right.
I said, "You have some ideas. Let me hear them."
Right.
And so ever since then, he said, "The guy taught me how to improv."
Oh, that's awesome. It's a great story. Yeah.
Right.
Now, Stan Kenton had a love for North Texas too, right? University of North
Yeah,
Texas.
his whole library went to North Texas.
That's yeah. And
Yeah.
of course, Kenton Hall, named after Stan Kenton. It's
Yeah.
fantastic. So okay, so between you, I mean, how many books have you written?
How many books?
Yes.
I don't know, several.
Well, let me see. I got a list of some here. Jazz rock voicings for the contemporary keyboard player.
That was the first one
right.
that I had published.
Scales for jazz improvisation. Jazz improvisation for keyboard players in 3 volumes. Yeah, the 3-volume set. I remember that. Jazz tunes for improvisation in two volumes with you, Rich Madison, Jack Peterson collaborated on that effort. In fact, that was the book we used in improv class at North Texas. Yeah. The Jazz Language, which I think is like an iconic book in jazz.
I like that book.
Oh my gosh, everybody uses it. You know.
The only problem is I gave it to Hal Leonard, and they didn't do diddly to promote it. I was really disappointed.
Yeah, because that's maybe one of the finest jazz education books ever.
I felt good about it.
You should.
You know.
Yeah, you should.
But
it's tremendous. The Jazz Sound, Jazz Piano Voicing Skills, Jazz Improvisation, Pocket Guide, Magic Motives, A Method for Developing Jazz Vocabulary, The Essential Jazz Harmony Book. How many lifetimes have you lived, man?
Well, I've tried to make things a little better. My goal has always been to make things as simple and clear as possible.
Right.
I don't want to impress someone with my vocabulary,
Right.
Literary vocabulary.
Right.
I want to guide their progress, get them moving, you know.
Yeah.
The thing of it is that sometimes it's hard to tell. I believe that all humans have a musician inside of them.
Right.
But the musician reviews itself in different ways. It may be just because it's someone who likes to sing along with the radio. You know, they remember tunes and learn them. And so it doesn't have to be any elaborate thing like a composer does or a jazz arranger does or anything like that. But it's all important, you know.
Absolutely.
And
yeah.
so my main line is students, when I asked them to play the melody to a song, I said, don't play it like you see it in a fake book, all in quarter notes and half notes. Do something with it.
Correct.
Make it your version of it.
Correct.
And
correct.
Most of the time they realize that, and it's kind of like, yeah, that'd be fun.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it's so important. You know, I agree. You know, making music is kind of like a birthright. You know, the musician is in us, and you know, the thing that I always try to stress upon students all the time, I want everybody to play, regardless of how well you play or how phenomenal you are. You know, I always compare. I said music could learn something from the what is it? The golf, the PGA, Professional Golf Association.
Right.
They want everybody playing golf. Everyone.
Yeah.
Whether you're good, whether you're bad, they want you to enjoy the game.
Yeah.
And I said, you know, music, we could learn from that, right?
I think so.
We want everybody to enjoy the thrill of making music at whatever level. And I remember I had a teacher when I was in high school. You know, he said to me, I'll never forget this. He said, Bob, well, he was wanting me to look at some Oscar Peterson transcriptions. And I was really young and foolish, and I said to him, well, you know, I like looking at those transcriptions, but I'm afraid that, you know, I want to play, I don't want to end up sounding like Oscar Peterson. And he goes, he says to me, Dad, he goes, Bob, he said, you will never sound like Oscar Peterson. And my heart went right down to my feet, right? But then this is what he said right after it. I love this. And he goes, and Bob, he goes, and Oscar Peterson will never sound like you. He said, you got to be you got to be you. And
I have to tell you my Oscar Peterson story. When we were in London with Clark Terry,
right,
we were playing in a club there called Ronnie Scott's, a great jazz club.
Right.
And one night, about halfway through the first set, Clark gets on the mic and says, "OP, is that you? Ladies and gentlemen, Oscar Peterson."
Oh my goodness gracious!
And I'm going,
Yeah.
"Oh my God, how did I sound on that first half of the set? I hope I didn't embarrass myself too much, you know."
Right.
But fortunately, Clark invited him to sit in, so I didn't have to play the rest of the set.
Right. Oh my gosh.
And then on the break, I got to meet Oscar, and I said, "I've loved your playing for so long. I can't tell you. Thank you, thank you, thank you."
Right.
He said, "Well, I enjoy your work." And I took the use of the word work to be a qualification. It means you're doing okay, but you're working at it.
Which you know, he didn't mean it that way, man.
No,
not at all, right? But that's that musician in us, man, always wanting to be better.
Well, we can be a tough taskmaster for ourselves.
We can.
You know.
We can.
And that's another thing I tell a lot of students all the time. Hey, cut yourself some slack, you know? And first of all, don't worry about mistakes, because Miles Davis said there are none.
That's right.
And ultimately, mistakes are part of your learning process.
Yeah.
In fact, you learn the most when you screw up.
Yeah. Have you ever heard Herbie Hancock tell the story about when playing with Miles?
Yeah, and he played a wrong chord.
He literally played a mistake. And he said it was flat out wrong.
Yeah.
And Miles ran with it. And he goes, he made it sound like it was absolutely intentional. You know, it's unbelievable. So between you, like I said, you, Jerry Coker, David Baker, if you put all your books together, I think you can comfortably say that you've educated several generations of jazz
Well, I
musicians.
hope I've done some good. I get feedback here and there along the way that makes me feel like it helped.
Oh, there's
you
no
know.
doubt. And talk a little bit about you and Jamey Aebersold have had a relationship for many, many years. In fact, you've are on many of the Jamey Aebersold collections play-alongs.
I'll tell you how that happened. 1968, I think. I've been doing the Stan Kenton clinics, and but I knew a lot of musicians that were on the National Stage Band camps.
Right.
And so that summer, '68, I was hired to do 3 National Stage Band camps. One in Salt Lake City, one in Portland, one in Seattle. No, there was a 4th one. What's the university in Illinois? I can't think of it now. Anyway, so I met Jamey there. In fact, I was walking through the music building looking for a room, and I come by this room where Jamey's talking to a bunch of students. And without skipping a beat, he says, "Yeah, well, I've heard that Dan Haerle does that, but I don't think it's a good idea." And I'm going, "What? I haven't even met this guy
Oh,
yet."
that's hilarious, right? Oh, that's funny.
But it led to many fun years. You know, he's
Yeah.
got a great, unique sense of humor, and is a really good musician,
right.
and a passionate supporter and recruiter for people to help stop smoking and
Oh,
think.
wow.
Oh yeah,
I didn't realize that about Jamey.
yeah. He always, at the jazz camps, he'd always have a couple of glass urns with a charcoal lung in it. You know,
Oh, no kidding.
from somebody smoking.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. But the first jazz camps we did together as combo camps were smaller, and we had maybe a dozen or 15 faculty at most.
Right.
Whereas in recent years, he's had 65 or 70 faculty, you know, because
Yeah.
there are 300 people, you know.
Yeah.
But so we got to play together a lot, and I did some things besides the camps with him, you know, and you know, we just became friends. I brought him. I think the fall after those stage band camps, I brought him out to California to work with my students at Monterey, and it's just been a great experience knowing him and working with him, and
Yeah.
and disagreeing with him. He's very opinionated about some things, and that's fine, you know. I am too.
Well, right. You have convictions.
we had a big argument about chord symbols and nomenclature one time, and I recalled going to a panel discussion in Reno at the Reno Jazz Festival one year, where they had a half a dozen great musicians lined up, and they were going to talk about it and decide once and for all what chord symbols we use. Do we say C-M-I-N, or do we say M-I, or do we say C dash? Or
right, and students get very confused.
All they did was argue for an hour. That's all they did.
They accomplished nothing, right? Yeah.
And I thought,
I'm not surprised.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, that's amazing.
Oh, I forgot one thing. After New York, I went to Phoenix for 2 years. I got hired to do co-lead a new jazz program there with the guy that was a saxophone teacher and ran things without any help for a number of years. And his students used to go to him and say, "When could we have an improv class?" And he'd say, "Just shut up and learn your lessons."
Right. Yeah,
But
classic answer.
But it was a great experience for me because of that. There was no jazz program entrenched and going. It was brand new,
right.
And so we had to kind of educate attitudes.
Well, I mean, you're a pioneer. I mean, everywhere you had to go was forging new ground. Quite honestly.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, there's no question about it. And now you think about the jazz programs that exist around the country at the different schools, universities, commercial music programs, right?
Up till 1967, North Texas was the only school that offered a degree in jazz.
Correct.
And that was actually in dance band.
Right.
That was the way they slipped it in under the door.
Right. Oh, man. So... yeah, so I mean, you like I said, Jerry Coker, David, pioneers. We owe so much gratitude to you guys for forging the way for jazz musicians and jazz educators and jazz education.
Well, I feel very fortunate to have had the opportunities I had. Although, when I was asked to come for an interview by the search committee at North Texas. I remember someone looked at my resume and said, "We see you've been here 2 years and you've been here 3 years."
Oh, right.
And so on.
I know where this is going.
And I said, well, mainly if I've seen an opportunity where I feel like I can contribute, I want to test it out and see. And I said, but sometimes I wish people would leave me alone. I said that to a member of the search committee.
And you still got hired.
And I got hired, yeah.
Oh, that's awesome.
Well, the dean in North Texas was the only dean I ever worked for that really administrated.
Yeah.
And he ran a tight ship. He did a good job. Mark Myers is his name. Mm-hmm. And he's the one that hired me and said, "No, you don't want to come in with full professor. Wait, you get a promotion,
There you go. So now I want to do a little rapid fire session with you.
Okay.
For our listeners. So I'm going to throw out some different jazz piano skills. And then I just want you to talk off the top of your head with regards to maybe some do's and some don'ts. Words of encouragement and pearls of wisdom from Dan Haerle with regards to these jazz piano skills. So the very first one, the classic of the granddaddy of them all, practicing scales and arpeggios. What are some do's and don'ts and advice you can give jazz piano skills listeners?
Well, it's all good. You can arpeggiate just triads, major and minor triads, and in all keys. You can arpeggiate 7th chords or 9th chords. I used to actually arpeggiate 13th chord, going 1, 3, 5, 7, 3, 5, 7, 9.
That's very
gradually
good.
going up a third and so forth.
Correct, right.
And there are a lot of variations you could do with that.
Right.
Mainly, I divide practice into 2 parts: a mechanical practice where you do the math and get the right notes,
right,
and a musical practice where you make music out of it.
That's fantastic. Yeah.
They're both important.
Absolutely.
And so playing arpeggios and scales and things like that. When I wrote my scales book, that was in about 1971 or something like that. No, must have been later. No, that's about when it was. I decided I didn't really feel secure with all my scales in all keys. So I wrote out all scales in treble and bass clef in all 12 keys, so I could put fingerings in if I wanted to. This is my practice workbook.
Yeah, right.
And
see, and that's vital, right? I call that paper practice. I tell students to do that kind of work today.
well, it took a lot of time to write all those scales.
Yeah.
It was a lot of pages. But you know what? When I went to the piano and started to play a certain scale in all keys, it was kind of easier.
Yeah.
Because in the process of writing that scale out, I would visualize it in another way. I mean, we visualize music by seeing an imaginary keyboard in your head,
correct,
and seeing your hand on the keyboard, or seeing notes on a staff,
correct,
or hearing what it sounds like. You know,
right.
They're all important.
Absolutely.
But again, the mechanical practice involves a lot of that. I am eternally grateful to my great and only great piano teacher. I didn't have a good piano teacher until my sophomore year at college. He was a Juilliard guy. His name was Herbert Melnick, and he was prodigious sight reader and technician. Wow. They'd hire him to fly, to Cleveland and do a concert with no rehearsal with somebody or something like that.
Holy smokes.
Yeah, I mean, something. Unfortunately, the man was in an auto accident and was killed at a far too young age. But I went in for my first lesson with him, talking about scales and arpeggios. He said, play a C major scale. And so I played a C major scale. My fingers were flying around in there. And he said, oh, stop. I said, what's the matter? He says, you're wasting motion and energy. Keep your fingers on the keys. I said, really? I started, we spent the rest of the lesson on that. And then he'd make me do it, I don't know, for like 6 months or something, till my hand was relaxed and functioning the way it should be,
Right.
And then, that reminded me of another thought. Now I can't remember.
So how do you encourage the students to do the music side? So there you have, with the scales and arpeggios, you have, like you said, the math side or the mechanical side.
Well, different ways. I want them to feel strongly about the melody and how they present it.
Right.
And I said, you can embellish things, you can add little fills and extra things, but you've got to be faithful to the melody as the composer wrote it.
Absolutely.
And because that's one of the main reasons we picked the tune.
Well, right. And can't you tell when somebody's improvising whether they know the melody or not?
Oh, yeah.
It sticks out like a sore thumb, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I also, along with that, encourage people to know what key they're in.
Right.
And, I said in the Great American Songbook or jazz compositions, you have lots of changes of key. Sometimes only one change from a major key to the relative minor and back again.
Right.
Sometimes the cadences 2-5-1 progressions in several keys,
Right.
But know what key you're in, because if you can just sound like you're in the right key, that's a good start.
That's a great start. Be in the right key.
You may not play a great melody, but at least you won't sound horrible,
Right.
I said that's been my goal my whole life, is just sound okay.
Right.
I'll settle for that.
Yeah, going back to the Vince Lombardi, right?
Yeah.
Grab excellence, right? So.
But no, what I was going to say though is I encourage students to spend at least 10 or 15 minutes of each practice session doing something in all keys. Okay. It might be arpeggiating a chord, or it might be playing a scale or a certain kind of mode.
Right.
Or it might be playing a 2-5-1 progression with the left hand.
Right.
Playing in all 12 keys. And moving chromatically up or down through all keys. Then when you feel like you're fairly secure, go around the cycle of fifths. Go up a fourth or down a fifth.
Right.
Because you have to know it better if
Correct.
you're going to jump to it.
Absolutely.
So the mechanical practice is to kind of liberate you so that you are prepared to make music.
Right.
And I also like to think about all the times I listened to jazz at the Philharmonic concerts, recordings where there were Norman Granz or somebody like that, and there were maybe 8 or 10 musicians on stage, you know.
Right.
And how some of the great players really didn't know that much about theory, but they knew what key they were in, and they knew how the melody went.
Correct.
And so instead of playing the Autumn Leaves going da 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 da, they go boop ba doo 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 be dee.
Right. Right.
And give their own interpretation of the feeling of it, you know.
So,
and here related to that, one of the great things about jazz, I think, is it's a very personal music.
No doubt.
In classical music, you know, we know the cliches and the typical kinds of elements that we find in the music of Mozart or Beethoven or Chopin or whoever. And so we can turn on the radio and say, oh, that's Chopin, you know.
Right.
Or that's, you know, Mahler or whatever. Well, in jazz, it's more personal. And we can say, yeah, that's jazz, or that's country music, or that's classical.
Right.
But in a personal way, we recognize the cliches or the favorite licks.
Right.
And we say, oh, that's Tommy Flanagan, or that's Herbie Hancock.
Right.
You know.
Very good point.
Yeah. And
Very good point.
I've noticed as I've traveled out of the country in Europe and so forth, and went to South Africa a couple of years ago, and I hear a national voice. I hear a very personal sound that's, I think, is related to the folk music and the musical experience of the players over there.
Right.
Whatever country. I can remember when I'd hear some English players trying to sound just like Charlie Parker, and maybe they did, but it was just like, it sounded like some people trying to sound like Charlie Parker.
Yeah. Right.
And I think it's important to leave ourselves open to express our experience, and it might involve hymns, having played in church, or it might involve, you know, so there's some very soul-rooted musicians who've played a lot of blues and so forth, and it's all good.
All good.
As Duke Ellington said, there's only 2 kinds of music: the good music and the other kind.
That's right. So, okay, what advice can you give to jazz piano students? I find an area that's very confusing and challenging for students: voicings. You know, voicings, if they don't have a real strong approach to studying voicings, it can become like fishing line real quick, get tangled up really quickly, and run down some blind alleys. So what advice can you give the listeners on how to approach the best ways to approach getting some really good jazz voicings under their fingers?
Well, start with the idea that the important tones in any chord are the 3rd and 7th. They reveal whether it's major or minor, whether it's dominant or major, and so forth. And so important tones, extensions like 9, 11, 13, alterations, sharp 5, sharp 9, whatever. Any alterations or extensions are important in describing the sound. Now, as far as voicings, there's a lot of systems and ways of going about it. I like the thing that I've been using the last few years called magic voicings.
Right.
Where if you play an E flat, G, A, D, below middle C with your right hand, and try putting different bass notes with that. You can put a C with it, you can put an F with it, you can put a B with it, you can put an E flat with it, you can put an A with it.
Right.
Very versatile. And that's not the only possibility. But there are many voicings that are very versatile, like 2 open fourths, for instance, a fourth stacked on another fourth. That could be a dominant chord, it could be a major chord, it could be a half diminished.
Right.
So it's a lot about vocabulary. Voicing vocabulary is going to involve, well, if you ask me to say, what is jazz harmony in 25 words or less? Well, it's chords with extensions or alterations and tensions in them. So, for instance, when we
Correct.
have a voicing like E, G, A, D, we've got a tension between G and A
Right.
because they're a step apart. And those tensions add to the color and the flavor of jazz harmony.
Right.
In that we don't normally want to play just triads.
Right.
There are spots where triads are brilliant. I remember George Sheeran telling me one his group played a concert at college I was going to in Iowa, and we had a friend in common or something. Long story short, he winds up at our house after the concert waiting to catch our train at 4 o'clock in the morning, you know.
Oh my
But it was a great hang, you know.
No doubt, right?
First of all, he loved to tell jokes. He had great jokes. But Dan's a piano player. Oh, yeah, great, thanks. Shut up, Mom.
Right.
And
Yeah, right.
so George very kindly says, "What, would you like to play something?" So
Oh,
I said,
my
"Okay."
gosh.
So I sat down and I played a ballad, and I ended on a kind of colorful chord with a sharp 11 and a 13th
Yeah, right.
and so on. And he got up and walked over to the piano, of course, blind.
Right. Right.
He says, "Well, that was very nice, and I like the chord you landed on. It's attractive." He said, "But we must never lose sight of the beauty of the triad."
Wow.
And I'm thinking, triad? Huh? This
Wow.
is jazz. Aren't we supposed to have all those
Yeah.
extensions?
Yeah, right.
And then he started playing Mozart and Haydn and Bach. And I'm going like, what?
Wow.
I guess I better take that stuff more seriously.
Wow. Yeah, right?
Yeah, I mean, it just knocked me off my feet, you know.
Right. Yeah.
Uh,
And he's so right. You know?
but as far as harmony or scales or other, that's all in the mechanical department. You do the math, learn the notes, you know.
Right.
But, you know, if you got a voicing for a dominant chord that you like, or say a minor chord, I call one voicing that I like the I Feel Pretty voicing. It goes, I feel pretty.
Right.
Da-da-da-dee.
Right.
So if I play G, B, C, E on an A minor 7, I've got the G and the C. I've got the third and the seventh. I've got a tension between B
Correct.
and C.
Right.
So that voicing is really good. That's why I call
Yeah.
attention to it a lot.
Right.
I feel pretty.
Right.
Um,
Oh my gosh.
but I try to encourage students to separate out problems. Try to look at a tune, identify the problems, and solve them.
Correct.
The problem might just be the key. You haven't played in that key that much, so you need to play scales and chords,
Right.
diatonic seventh chords in the
Right.
key, and so on.
Right. Get familiar with the key.
It might be certain kind of modes are required that you normally don't
Right.
use.
Certain sounds.
You know, whatever.
Right.
But I encourage them to improvise with the right hand with no accompaniment with the left hand. I said, you know, the good news is a piano player can play a chord to support the sound when he's improvising. The bad news is a piano player can play a chord to support the sound, and the melodic line may not be doing it.
Correct.
So
Right.
I encourage them to practice just right-handed
Right.
alone, playing melodies, and see if you can hear the harmony and you're getting emphasis on the important notes. You
So
know?
important, right? To sit there and pretend you're a trumpet player, pretend you're a sax player,
Yeah.
and play lines like a trumpet player would approach them,
Exactly.
and breathe like a horn player would breathe, right? That's why I tell students all the time. We got, you know, I'll use your line, right? You know, the good news is on the piano, we don't have to breathe. We can play long lines.
Yeah, right.
The bad news is
We don't
we
have,
have to breathe. You know, so yeah. So we've talked about some scales, arpeggios, some voicings. How about rhythm? The development of rhythmic vocabulary, rhythmic ideas. I find students struggle a lot with rhythm development. Being able to play quarter notes and eighth notes and swing.
Well, I think that's where listening becomes an important element. You know, we listen for information and inspiration.
Right.
You know?
Right.
And initially
well
we
put.
may just want to hear
Right.
This idea. To this day, I'll still do that. I may be driving down the road. I may pull over to the curb for a minute and sing back what I just heard to make sure I had it straight,
Right.
Or when I get home, I'll recall it and play it on the piano or something. But
right.
either one's good. But it's a gradual process of adding vocabulary of various sorts, and listening has a huge effect on the outcome and what you do with it.
Right. You're right. We tend to want to think of vocabulary always being linear, and there's harmonic vocabulary, the voicings that we have to get under our hands, rhythm vocabulary, right? We got to start thinking a little broader. Encourage the student to think a little broader than just thinking vocabulary in terms of a melodic idea.
Yeah. But I think the melody is really important. It gets to be more and more important to me. For instance, I think in classical music, the sonata allegro form.
Yes.
Where there's a exposition, statement of one or two or three themes, a development section where those themes are messed with extensively, and then a recapitulation to wrap it up.
Right.
Well, that's what we do in jazz. We play a theme, we have a development section, and then we have a recapitulation.
That's exactly right.
Unfortunately, the development section very often has nothing to do with the theme.
Right.
And it really hit me one time. I like the way he played the melody, but there was no trace of it after that.
Correct.
And
right.
And here's the thing about improvisation: it's spontaneous composition.
Right.
But you still need a lot of preparation for that.
Right.
When we improvise, I think we rely heavily on learned information.
Correct.
And I learned that the hard way. I have favorite licks I like to play.
Right.
And I'd say, I play that all the time. I got to stop playing that lick. That's no good.
Right.
And then I started hearing great players play the same idea a half a dozen times in a solo.
In the same solo.
Yeah.
In the same solo.
And I think, well, he must like that idea. I guess it's okay to repeat it.
Well, and along those same lines, going back to what George Shearing said to you, I remember doing a transcription of a Red Garland transcription and discovering that he kept repeating this triadic idea. And I kept thinking, I must be hearing that wrong. It can't be a triad, and it can't be the same thing repeated because it sounds way too hip. And come to find out, no, I'm not hearing that wrong.
Yeah, it's the rhythm.
Right. It's correct. It's absolutely correct. So, yeah, that's fascinating. I remember in one of our back in the '80s, in one of our jazz small group forums. Remember the small group forums?
Yeah.
That we used to have, I think, on Friday afternoons where you'd come in the
Someone
Kenton Hall.
play.
Right. And I remember you said to somebody one time, and it's stuck with me ever since because I know your passion for melody, right? And somebody got done playing, and you said, "Look, if I can't remember the tune, it might have been Stella by Starlight or some classic tune that everybody would play." And you said, "Look, if you want to play Stella, play Stella. But if you want to write your own tune, then write your own tune." Because what you just got done playing after you played the head of Stella didn't even sound like Stella. So, it's stuck with me ever since, all those years.
I've really been trying to improve my improvisation the last 8 or 10 years, I would say. And I find it gets a little easier if I don't overreach.
Right.
You don't have to create a whole earth-shaking experience when you're improvising.
Right.
You can just play another melody. But I can remember times on concerts when I'd play some tune and play the melody and then kind of get there to the end of the chorus and think, can I play anything as good as the melody? Let's give it a try,
Right.
And that's why I found myself recalling bits and pieces of the melody and trying to build off of that,
Right.
It's like a matter of interpretation how we account for things.
Right.
You know.
Yeah. Yeah, you had another great line at one of those classes. I remember you said to somebody, "I really love your ideas. I really love all your ideas, but I don't need to hear them all in one song."
I remember one trumpet player who played, and afterwards, I felt bad about it, but it just came out. I couldn't seem to stop it. I said, you're like a butterfly flitting around the changes, but you never land on any.
Yeah. Well.
But the good thing was, a year or two later, he was landing on them.
Yeah, right. See, that back then in those classes back in the 80s and that, and I look at those years so fondly, man. That was a great time. I miss them, quite honestly. But you guys were tough. You, Rich, Jack, but we all learned a ton, man. If you didn't take that approach, I don't think we would have developed like players like we had.
Well, another thing I feel very lucky about is being associated with Jamey Aebersold and Jerry Coker and David Baker and so on, because those guys told the truth.
Right.
And we all understood that it was in a loving way and because we cared about helping.
Oh my gosh.
Now I'm not just trying to put you down here. I'm just trying to wake you up.
Yeah. I remember Rich in an improv class. We were playing what is this thing called Love. And the trombone player in the back kept playing a D natural on that G minor 7 flat 5, and Rich goes, "Whoa!" He let it slide the first time. I think he even let it slide the second time. Then he slammed the brakes on. And he asked this trombone player. He said, "Why do you insist on playing a D natural on that half diminished chord?" And the trombone kid said, "Because that's the way I heard it." And Rich goes, "Well, then you need to pack up your bags and hit the road," because he goes, "You only have one question to answer here. Do you want to sound like a professional or don't you? And if you don't, hit the road." That was right in class. And then Dan, then he starts the band back up and he points over to me to take my solo. I was playing octaves D flats. I was going like this. I was going to make sure I play that half diminished correct, right? And Rich looked over and he went like this. But those were tough. You guys told the truth.
Well, that's the thing, and there's a way to be honest and not be scathing.
Correct.
That's the challenge for an educator, is to be honest and tell the truth, but do it in a loving way.
Right, in a supportive, encouraging way. So, well, you've done that for many, many years. And I can't begin to thank you enough.
Oh.
Not just for me, but on behalf of literally, and you know this, everybody who's went through the North Texas program and influenced by you and influenced by your teaching and all the books and materials that you have put together for students to learn for many, many years. So on behalf of the entire jazz world, man, thank you for everything.
You're welcome, Jazz World. Thank you for all the great music.
All right, so Dan Haerle website. Everybody can check out Dan. He's
DanHaerle.com.
DanHaerle.com. Go check it out. All his books are listed there. His materials where you can purchase it. You're doing lessons online too still?
Yeah, a few. I'm not really wanting to fill up my days too much.
Right? Well, so, and then, but check out his website, do a Google search for Dan, check out all the wonderful things he's done, not just recently, but throughout his entire life. Dan?
Yeah, look on the books page down at the bottom where it says Jazz Hints. There's a bunch of free stuff there that you can
fantastic.
Get on scales and voicings and all kinds of stuff.
Fantastic. Dan, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me on this.
It's been a pleasure.